Welcome to Down to Earth Astrology and Primal Girl Wellness. This is Ms. Jenny, and I am your astrologer. This video is an Astrology Investigates celebrity video, and we are looking at the chart of Russell Brand, comedian, communicator, celebrity, and, right now, notorious bad boy, who may be in deeper hot water than anybody realizes. Let's take a look at who this guy is. Russell Brand, pervert, predator, or victim? Okay, well, I'm not going to lie. I'm only vaguely aware of who Russell Brand is until now. My literal only awareness of him was that he had married Katy Perry and divorced her, Katy Perry the musician. That's pretty much all I know about him. As it turns out, Mr. Brand is a very prolific broadcaster on social media and other platforms. And has gone from being a comedian. I didn't know he was a comedian. Gone from being a comedian to what he describes as a social activist. He is in the news currently because he has been hit with some allegations of being a rapist, among other things. So that is big hot news. And the reason apparently that this is a big deal is because while this is happening, a lot of the major platforms like YouTube and a couple of other sites he's on where he broadcasts are all demonetizing his channels or making him disappear completely. So Mr. Brand, of course, is insisting that he is being targeted by the government, the deep state, because he's being too honest or hitting too close to home. And that's why they're demonetizing his channel, free speech, I'm a victim, all this sort of stuff. And that may or may not be true, but at the end of the day, Mr. Brand still has to answer for the allegations that are being made that started off this controversy. So here's what we know so far. Mr. Brand has allegations charged against him or made against him for rape, sexual assault, and emotional abuse. 4 women are alleging sexual assault by Mr. Brand between 2006 and 2013, which is apparently the height of his career when he's been at his most famous. One woman alleges that Brand raped her without a condom. Dear God, that's disgusting. Against a wall in his Los Angeles home. She says Brand tried to stop her leaving until she told him she was going to go to the bathroom. When she left, she was later treated at a rape crisis center on the same day because she reported it, which the Times, the investigative journalist at the Times, has confirmed via actual medical records. This was a reported case of rape. A second woman in the United Kingdom alleges that Brand assaulted her when he was in his early 30s and she was 16 and still in school. She alleges that he referred to her as the child during an emotionally abusive and controlling relationship. Looking back, she says he engaged in the behaviors of a groomer. Well, yeah, that's one word we could use, I suppose, and more about that in a minute. A third woman claims that Brand sexually assaulted her while she worked with him in Los Angeles. She alleges she repeatedly told Brand to get off her, and when he eventually relented, he flipped and was super angry. She says he threatened to take legal action if she told anyone else about her allegation. And the fourth woman, so far, has alleged being sexually assaulted by Brand in the United Kingdom and him being physically and emotionally abusive towards her. Now, apparently these allegations by these women has set off not just a firestorm of controversy, but apparently there's a whole lot of people that don't want to believe that this is true and he would never do such a thing, and they're clearly out for the money or trying to bring him down, or the deep state, the government, conspiracy theory. Oh my God, the conspiracy theorists are out in force. Because they just don't want to believe that their man of the hour, their golden child, would do such an awful thing. And in case you've been living under a rock for the last 3 billion years, as these things go, still to this day, when women make allegations of rape, it is still very, very hard to be taken seriously and believed, because people still want to believe that when a woman is crying rape, she's doing it out of revenge or vindictiveness, and often making it up, and it never really happened. Statistically, we know that this is not the case, but that's a whole other conversation. So these are the allegations made against Mr. Brand that has started this domino effect of major platforms demonetizing his channels, and or just removing his content entirely, or removing content that specifically addresses him. So we'll see how long this video stays up. And my suspicion is, and I could be wrong, that they know more than we do. So, because it's not like he's ever been, very shy about his lack of respect for women, and or his misdeeds and misbehaviors. I mean, we've got video of him being, frankly, a disgusting douchebag creep with women, journalists and stuff, in public in front of people. So if that's what he's capable of doing in front of people and on video to be funny, I can only imagine what he's capable of when there's no one there to witness it. But, that's just my thought. Your mileage may vary depending on what your previous experiences have been with men like this. I'm just saying. All right, so let's take a little bit more deeper look into this before we get into the chart. Alice, the 16-year-old who's made these who was 16 at the time that's making these allegations, and this is not her real name, by the way, adds that Brand taught her to lie to her parents. The woman said that over the following weeks after meeting Brand, he referred to her as the child, and she alleged that he was controlling and sexually and emotionally abusive. She said he sent a card to her secondary school to take her out of lessons and asked her to save his name as Carly in her phone to deceive her parents. He also allegedly gave her scripts on how to lie to her parents and advised her to hide the relationship from her friends, describing the experience as isolating. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've got to hide this relationship from other people, and especially the parents, and the friends, there's definitely something wrong, and he knew there was everything wrong with this relationship. So my understanding is the age of consent technically in England is 16, but the fact of the matter is, even with the age of consent being 16 in England, he knew how inappropriate and disapproval worthy this relationship would have been, because he certainly didn't have any good intentions towards the girl. So much so that he actively engaged in teaching her how to keep this hidden from friends and family. So he knew absolutely that there was everything wrong with this relationship between himself and this 16-year-old girl, and that nobody was going to be okay with this. So he literally tried to engage her and corral her into also keeping this a secret. I was sat up in the bed, up against the headboard, and he forced his penis down my throat, and I couldn't breathe. He was just choking me. I was crying, and he said, "Oh, I only want to see your mascara run anyway." This is the statement of Alice, who was 16 years old at this time when she was dating, air quotes, Russell Brand without her parents' knowledge. He was 30 years old. And by the way, she was a virgin before she met him. And we're going to bring you up to speed to September 26, 2023. Scotland Yard, which houses the Metropolitan Police, announced that it has launched a police probe relating to the allegations made against Brand in London, as well as the rest of the UK. Following an investigation by Channel 4's dispatches and the Sunday Times, the Met has received a number of allegations of sexual offences in London, the police force said in a statement. We have also received a number of allegations of sexual offences committed elsewhere in the country and will investigate these. Oh my. So this, my friends, is just the tip. Just the tip, darling. I'm just going to put the tip in. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I promise you, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So looking at Russell Brand's chart, there are some interesting things in here. Um, but let's take a look. So you guys, if you're following along and you're actually doing astrology, here's some information for you. He was born June 4th, 1975 in Orsett, England. Born a couple minutes after midnight. So I have the chart set up for like 12:03, I think, something like that. Um, because once you get down closer to 12:10, it's no longer a couple of minutes. Now we're like, 10 minutes past. So I've got it set for midnight plus a couple minutes. According to information about Russell Brand's childhood, his father was a famous photographer, and his parents got divorced when he was only 6 months old. His mother raised him single handedly as best she could, given that she ended up getting cancer later. Brand had a tough childhood, which led to a tougher adolescence. He was sexually abused by his tutor when he was young, and his mother contracted breast and uterine cancer when he was only 8. So that right there, I gotta tell you guys, like that right there speaks volumes about what we're dealing with in terms of the formative years, right? And the psychological scarring that we're dealing with. Owing to his mother's failing health, Brand lived with his relatives. By the time he turned 14, it was confirmed that he suffered from bulimia nervosa. And for those of you who don't know what that is an eating disorder. Um, Anorexia nervosa are people who refuse to eat. They literally waste away and starve themselves to death. Bulimia nervosa means that they binge eat, so they overeat until they're sick, and then they go on these self denying kind of diets where they won't eat anything at all. Then they overeat. So bulimia nervosa is the binging disorder. Um, in any event, all of these things contributed to his drug addiction. I believe he was a heroin addict, I think someone said. So here, for those of you who are rectifying charts, here are the things you want to look at. One, parents got divorced when he was only 6 months old, so we've got a timer right there. This is a major event in his life. And it's a major event in his life because the father did not completely disappear. Apparently, the father came back into his life on and off throughout these years. And when Brand himself was a teenager, like 14 or something, his father, who is a complete scumbag, so if he's got a crap attitude towards women or about women, he comes by it fair and he's getting it from his father. So the father was around in and out of his life, and at 14 or so, his father took his son to, oh God, where did they go? Not Bangkok. It was one of the Asian cities. Because of course we go to third world countries, right? And threw him in a cab, hired a couple of prostitutes, took him back to a room, and literally a shared room with his son, and twin beds in a room, and had his son sit on the other bed, and sent a couple of the prostitutes over to visit with him and take his virginity while his father was right there in the room with him on the other bed with the other prostitute. Yeah, this is his father. Um, Also, so 6 months is an important time for him. And also the relationship with his father is very telling as well. The sexual abuse by a tutor, we don't know if the tutor was male or female, but I'm going to bet you good money he was sexually abused by a male tutor. And there's a lot of conflict about homoerotic desires and or feelings as a result of the sexual abuse. And, so the whole issue is sexual identity, all this sort of stuff. So there's that. And then, of course, the mother contracting breast and uterine cancer when he was only 8. It sounds like these things happened simultaneously. So his mother would have been out of commission because, Jesus, breast and uterine cancer would have made it really difficult for her to do anything. If you've ever known anybody who's ever struggled with cancer, it's not. This is definitely not a picnic in the park, which may have made her unable to defend or protect him or even be aware of what was going on. So for an 8-year-old, he may have felt that he was not only abandoned by his father, but now his mother had failed him somehow. And with a toxic father like he had coming in and out of his life later with all this crappy views of women, I'm sure that his father poisoned that psychological well in terms of what his mother did or didn't do for him that she, in all honesty, probably wasn't even able to do, and had no idea. So there's that. And so that's something to take into consideration if you're rectifying a chart. And At 14, confirmed that he had suffered bulimia nervosa. So that also is a good marker for you if you're rectifying the chart to kind of look to see if you've got the right information in the chart. Okay. So, and this is only important because being born a couple minutes after midnight, his ascendant is in the very, very late degrees of Capricorn. But more importantly, the midheaven is like at 29 degrees or 0 Sag. So we've got a really tight cusp up there, which could shift depending on when exactly he was born, what those couple of minutes were. I'm going to go with late degrees of Scorpio in that midheaven. I do not think this is 0 Sag midheaven on the chart. The late degree Capricorn doesn't change. So, but your mileage may differ. So just some food for thought, putting that out there. Alrighty, now let's get into the astrology. So when you're looking at a chart, we're looking at some big stuff first, right? These are the important key points we look at first. So we know he's a Gemini, moon's in Aries, blah, 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 blah. But where we're actually going to start here is with the ascendant. So the ascendant is 27 Capricorn. And even if we move the time around by a couple of minutes, it's still going to be late degrees Capricorn rising. So with the ascendant, now that we know that he's Capricorn rising, regardless of degrees, what we're looking for is the chart ruler, which would be Saturn, because Saturn rules Capricorn. And his Saturn is in Cancer. And it's in the 6th, squaring Jupiter in the Aries in the 2nd house exact. And I'm going to come back and talk about that and what that means. But I will say this. Donald Trump also has Saturn in Cancer, and Donald Trump also has a really screwed up view and relationship with women across the board, largely having to do with his mother, but too much to get into here, but they share this aspect, right? So when it comes to women and their views and relationships with women and, not being great, to put it mildly, they're both very similar in that respect. Now, Russell Brand has the moon in Aries. Let me get my little pen here. He has the moon in Aries. It is conjunct Mars. Now, Mars is in its rulership in Aries, which makes that Mars a very dominant note in the grand scheme of things. Also note, though, that Moon Mars opposes Pluto. So remember we talked about he was sexually abused by a tutor. So we know that there is the possibility that this could describe, because remember the moon is the early formative years, right? So that Moon-Mars conjunction opposing Pluto could describe the after effects or the response to trauma, because Pluto typically, not always Pluto, but when Pluto does show up, it's usually a good guess that there's something in terms of evolutionary trauma that the person is working through. So we know that there's a possibility that this is how this is showing up. So we'll get back to that as well. All right, so there's that, right? Now, the sun, he has the sun in Gemini, right here in the 4th house, and it is opposed Neptune in that 10th. So this is important also because the sun not only rules the father, but it also rules how we see ourselves, our identities in life, and because it involves the 4th and 10th houses, has a lot to do with how the public sees him as well. Because remember, the 10th house is how the public sees you, people at a distance, people who are very close and personal to you, that know you personally. That's going to be what they see as the 1st house. But for everybody else, people, coworkers, associates, people on the street, school teachers, club members, it's always going to be the 10th house that they see, because that's your public image, right? We're going to come back to that also. Now, in terms of strengths of planets, he has Mercury in its rulership in Gemini, which makes that Mercury super strong and super, well, it's a super Gemini, it's a super Mercury. Mars, remember that devilish Mars? That Mars is also in rulership in Aries. So right here, Mercury and Gemini, Mars and Aries are both powerful in this chart. And we see this played out a lot in his personality, that Mercury in Gemini is very glib, often talks out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. They can literally change their opinion on a dime, right? they're very fleet-footed, they're quick. We see a lot of Gemini and Mercury in Gemini also here in the United States with some of our senators, and not necessarily the good ones. I'll give you an example. Matt Gaetz is a classic one for that Mercury and Gemini, constant shifting, talking up both sides of their mouth sort of thing. Lots of that in our Senate because that's what they do. It's all airplay, it's all wordplay. And Russell Brand has that in spades. Obviously, he's a comedian. He's well, he calls himself a social activist, but he's a commentator, right? He's a social commentator, so he's actively using that Mercury in Gemini. And because Mercury's in its rulership in Gemini, he's not only very good with it, it's also very easy for him. So, of course, he would do well in Gemini professions. Mars in rulership in Aries, we see this because, this impulsive me first, me, conquer, take, I am the warrior, I get what I want sort of thing. We're seeing that now, that selfish, self-oriented, don't give a damn about other people or how this falls out. It's just what I want. And this is literally what we're seeing now. So, and the thing about it is with Mars and Aries like that, typically that might work for him. I mean, certainly he's gotten this far being pushing forward. Remember, selfishness is a survival skill. Too much selfishness is the problem, right? It's always about a balance. So that selfishness and that preoccupation with self and survival has worked well for him because he's gotten this far. I don't find him, I've listened to some of his stuff. I don't find him funny or entertaining. I don't find a lot of, well, frankly, I just don't find a lot of redeeming anything in anything coming out of his mouth. But apparently other people do. So that Mars in Aries with Mercury in Gemini is working for him. Okay. So Mars in Aries being the, big D-bag that he is with impulsive, crude behavior, like basically like a soldier out in the field. This has worked for him because it feeds into that Mars and Aries energy. Mars in its rulership in Aries means that these things come easily, gets rewarded, and he gets elevated for those things. Okay. Now Saturn, the last planet, everything else is kind of peregrine, but Saturn is in its detriment in Cancer. And Donald Trump, as I said before, also has Saturn in Cancer. This is a really difficult and challenging placement that does not bring a lot of joy with it. A whole lot of problems, not a lot of joy. We're going to talk about that in a minute. All right, now the last things I want you guys to look at, he's got 27 degrees on the ascendant. I'm saying he's got 29 degrees on the midheaven. I don't think he's zero Sagittarius right on the midheaven. So with the midheaven, with 29 Scorpio on the midheaven, Mars becomes ruler of the midheaven, right? Mars with Moon and Jupiter down here in that second house means that he makes his money being offensive, right? Classic Mars, in your face, haha, and Jupiter is about comedy, right? Making people laugh. And you probably didn't know this, but strong moons show up also in the charts of successful comedians, right? So it's no surprise that with Moon, Mars, Jupiter, crude, offensive, in-your-face humor as a comedian would have been very successful and certainly would have been an occupational direction that he would have gone in this lifetime. So I'm going to stick with the 29 Scorpio in that midheaven. Now, the thing I want you guys to think about, right, is when you've got late degrees like this on the angles, right, on the ascendant midheaven, this, in my estimation, represents last chance lifetimes. So in this lifetime, he's coming in with a very, very specific cross he has to bear. And it also means he's been given choices. He'll be given lots of choices. Angels on one shoulder, devils on the other. And it's up to him to make, to make different choices than he did in the previous lifetime, if you believe in past lives. But more specifically, there's an urgency and an intensity and a gravity to the decisions he makes that will absolutely affect the trajectory of his life. So, and there won't be second chances. These are, when you get those late degrees on the angles, these are last chance lifetimes. And the person often feels like there's a sense of gravity or importance or pressure, right, to make the right decision, which can be very overwhelming and or burdensome. But again, astrology does not show character, and these things become a matter of choices we make based on our character. And our character is defined by our sense of and application of integrity and ethics and all those things that, we struggle, well, we should be struggling with every day. So there you go. All right, now let's go back to some other stuff here. So chart ruler is Saturn in Cancer in the 6th house. So Saturn in Cancer in the 6th, what that tells me, and your mileage may vary, is he's neurotic. So not only do we have some health issues, remember we said he's bulimia nervosa and eating disorder? Well, Cancer rules food, okay? Saturn rules denial, okay, and restriction, and also fear, right? Lots of fear and resentment. Saturn in Cancer in that 6th house, the 6th house is your daily habits, your diet, nutrition, food, physical things that keep you alive. The 12th house is the mental house. Okay, the 6th house is the physical house. So if he had had Saturn in Cancer in the 12th house, he'd probably be in a loony bin right now, right, on medication. But with Saturn in Cancer in that 6th house, what this has ended up instead being, are physical disorders, or in this particular case, physical disorders that have to do with food. So the symbolism here is pretty striking, pretty striking. Now, when we look at this Saturn in Cancer in the 6th, what we're also seeing is that it is squaring that Jupiter in Aries in the 2nd. Now, the thing to understand about the 2nd house is that your 2nd house has a lot to do with your values in life. It's not just about money. Money is, money is just a symbol. It could literally be seashells and eggs for all that really matters. The 2nd house has to do with your values, and typically the things that you value or how much value you have in society is reflected by the amount of money you have access to, the amount of resources that you have, the physical goods that you have, and the condition and rarity of them, right? This is why we often confuse very wealthy people as having more value than poor people, because their things symbolize or represent a higher status or a higher value in society because they have access to those things, like a reward for being a better person. But we also know that that is not true, right? In the grand scheme of things, and we've seen way too many examples of this, having a lot of stuff, having a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean that you as a person have any value to anybody as anything except a bankroll. And even then, it doesn't necessarily show merit, because it could literally just be greed that has driven this amassing of wealth. So we know that. So the 2nd house for Russell Brand and everyone else has to do with his value systems. So with Saturn, nasty old Saturn here, squaring Jupiter in that 2nd house of values, personal values, what we know is that there's definitely going to be issues throughout life where Russell is going to struggle with literally his fears about not being worthy enough to be accepted, Saturn in Cancer, okay, and his overwhelming desires to be first, to survive, to make himself the most important thing in the room, to be noticed. Because Aries, right? Aries is the infant of the zodiac. So Jupiter in Aries in the 2nd makes him very impulsive and further reinforces the selfishness. He's grasping, grabby, right? He sees, he wants, he grabs for it, like a toddler or an infant, grabbing for things without thinking about what they're grabbing at. So there's a lot of impulse control issues here, okay? And with Saturn squaring Jupiter, because Saturn and Jupiter also, remember, are the social planets. This is very important here. Saturn and Jupiter represent our social contracts. Jupiter represents ethics and integrity, right? Principles. Saturn represents the social contracts, the laws, the rules by which we have to play to be a member of a society, right? We're not living on mountaintops with the goats, and he certainly isn't either. So Jupiter and Saturn emphasized in chart usually indicates an emphasis in this lifetime on issues of the rules and integrity and ethics and character and social contracts. Okay. And he's going to struggle with this because these two things are in conflict with each other, right? Being selfish as a means of survival and impulse or poor impulse control, me first, me first, me first, versus, right? Well, if I do these things, what if I hurt somebody? Feeling guilty about being so selfish, this kind of thing. Am I even worthy of having these things? So I thought that was kind of interesting that showed up, given given the issues that we're dealing with right now, which has everything to do with social contracts. When you sexually assault somebody, um, man, woman, adult, or child, when you sexually assault or physically molest someone, you are breaking a social contract, because what you are doing is putting your desire, for whatever it is, whether it's to intimidate them or entertain yourself or to satisfy your lascivious desires, whatever the reason is for you to do these things, you have now put that ahead of their autonomy and their right to have their own body and have that boundary respected. Their body doesn't belong to you, that you don't own them, right? It's not an object you can pick up and touch and do whatever you want with. These are social contracts we all abide by, or we're supposed to. And so him dealing with this also, given this square in his chart, him dealing with this issue also means that, when these things come up, when these things come down, they come down heavy like a hammer, and he will suffer much greater penalties than other people as a result of this. Because again, this is a last chance lifetime. He's only got this one lifetime left to get it right. Um, so, yeah. I'm just saying. Okay. Now, let's look at this Moon conjunct Mars with Jupiter, right? But more specifically, Moon Mars in Aries as it opposes Pluto. Because certainly the Saturn is wreaking a little bit of havoc on that stellium. Now, it's a wide stellium. Jupiter's out at 17, but Jupiter's a big fat planet. So we give Jupiter a lot wider orb than we would any other planets. We're going to assume that Jupiter is right there with Mars. And Moon, of course, also gets a much bigger orb, so it's a wide berth. So Moon and Jupiter are just touching, but Mars and Aries is right between them, and that is the thing that connects them. So the thing that connects his emotional nature, his soft nature, for whatever it is, in his case would be infantile, as well as the socially conscious part of him, that Jupiter. The thing, unfortunately, that connects those things are his Mars, which is his libido, his crotch forward kind of approach to life. And we're definitely hearing all about that. So, like I said, I didn't know about him until recently, except that he had married a musician. And now I'm trying to catch up and read, and I'm like, yikes. So it's the symbolism of the chart is reflected in all the stories about him for sure. So with Moon conjunct Mars, even leaving Jupiter, Jupiter's just going to exaggerate these things. With Moon conjunct Mars, and in Aries of all things, you're going to get somebody who's incredibly impulsive and has very poor self-control. You're also going to get somebody who's very hot-tempered, literally like an infant. If they don't get what they want, they scream bloody murder and throw tantrums and fits because they don't think past themselves. It's literally, infants need attention, and infants don't understand delayed gratification. So it's literally either in front of them and in grasp, or it's not. And when they need something, they don't know how to ask or get it. They scream bloody murder because it's a survival skill for an infant. With Moon Mars conjunct like this in Aries, and with Jupiter exaggerating all of this makes it pretty likely that this person may have some difficulty maturing out of that phase, and this may be their default go-to setting when they don't get what they want, which is being domineering, abusive, loud, screaming, tantrum throwing, infantile, and very, very, very selfish or self-oriented. Not a great combination. And if you've ever had anybody in your family or that you've ever had a relationship with that had this particular combination, strong Aries in their charts, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I got one of them in my family. Although with her, it's the moon. I think she's a quarter moon, sun in Capricorn, moon in Aries, but that moon in Aries is just self absorbed beyond words. They can be very, very charming. Make no mistake about it. They can be very, very charming because that Aries is very innocent and childlike, right? So it's easy to forget what selfish monsters are capable of being, until they throw a tantrum and tear everything up in the house because they didn't get what they wanted. All right. So with Russell, with that Moon Mars conjunction, that infantile Aries combination, it is opposing Pluto, which is pretty gnarly, pretty damn gnarly, because what that also means is that when he throws down a tantrum, when he decides to be selfish, when he decides to be all the worst attributes of that Moon, Mars, and Aries combination, oh my God, he does it in spades. The other thing, just on the aside, I just want to point out to you guys, right? So with Mars and Aries, Venus and Mars typically rule the libido or romantic nature in a person's chart. Okay. So in men, when we look at their Mars, this is how they express their sexual energy, their testosterone sort of thing. With Mars and Aries, like they see themselves, Mars and Aries men see them, they're very simple creatures, and they see themselves as the conqueror, right? They don't believe in softness and poetry and sweet words. No, no, no. They're exactly the ones who, like, caveman Ted will grab you by the hair and drag you off and have their way with you. Ooh, me man, you woman. Oh, right. That's the Mars and Aries. So that can be very attractive to some people and very charming when this is what you want, right? And you've agreed to this. Um, but under no circumstances does that Mars and Aries ever see themselves as being soft, sweet, seductive, or vulnerable. Their idea of seducing is beating their chest and playing Tarzan and Jane. So with him, with that in mind, that whole domineering, I'm the man, kind of thing. Opposing Pluto, it is also, and this is just a icky combination, because it's Aries Libra, right? But this particular combination in his chart could also indicate that not only is he into BDSM, but more specifically, he's into sadomasochism in a psychotic, non-consensual game playing sort of way, like some deep, dark, scary spiders are in that box that you don't want any parts of. So, and listen, there's a lid for every pot, and I know somewhere out there there's somebody who's so bent and twisted and broken inside. This is exactly what they want. They want someone who's never going to ask for consent, that's never be, worried about, being consensual. Please, daddy, hurt me, right? Ugh, not for me. But so I know they're out there. But the problem in his particular case is this is such a deeply ingrained twisting in the wires that he's like this all the time, whether you've discussed or agreed to a BDSM encounter or not, right? And I think this is what we're hearing about with these women that are coming forth. And there will be more. There will be many more because this is an intrinsic part of his nature. So he gets off on power, right? Aries, power, Pluto, power, Pluto and Libra, right? How much can I push, bend, and twist before you break? Moon and Mars and Aries, selfish, 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 me, 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 I'm the man, caveman, roar, kind of thing. You'll do what I say because I told you to, and you will like it, or you won't, and I won't care. Ugh, yikes. So, and again, this is not something that he's into because he enjoys it and he likes it when other people, when he finds that right fit, that other woman that gets it. No, no, he just likes to do this, period, all the time. This is who he is in a very twisted way, unless he really works on himself and gets that under control. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that this neurotic nature of his, okay, has never been addressed, and his impulse control clearly has not been addressed either. We can see it in his comedy, we can see it in his behavior in interviews, we can see it everywhere. Like literally, you don't have to look far to see evidence of this. So this would, in my mind, lead me to believe that he's a seriously emotionally damaged person, and I mean this in ways that make him really, really dangerous to other people. But what do I know? I'm not a 16-year-old girl being asked to lie to my parents about seeing a 30-year-old man while he basically engages in non-consensual BDSM with me, and he takes my virginity, and then tosses me to the curb when he's done. Okay, so anyway, I'm just saying. And listen, before you guys say anything, if you're one of these guys out here that's defending, well, she was 16, she's practically a grown woman, no, stop. She is still a child, just like a 16-year-old boy is still a child. There's a lot they don't understand and they don't know. They are not adults. And if he, for a minute, thought she was adult enough to handle this relationship, he wouldn't have needed her to lie about it to everybody. So just stop. Okay, so now the sun, he's got the sun in Gemini, that glib, smooth talker Gemini, talks out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. And it's in the fourth house, right, of family, hearth, and home, and it is opposing Neptune. Now, this particular combination is a little tricky. So on the one hand, with Sun-Neptune oppositions like this, and certainly with Sun-Neptune oppositions in the mutable signs, Gemini, Sag, Virgo, Pisces, you can theoretically get some really gifted, talented people, right? Especially artists and musicians. Or you can get people who absolutely refuse to take responsibility for anything, live in their own little fantasy world, and no matter what's happening, they can rationalize, justify, twist things around their head, and get you convinced. Because remember, he's got Mercury and Gemini. He's really good at convincing people. Get you convinced that, this sky is pink, not blue. Today is Wednesday, not Sunday, and the year is 1806, not 2024. Pick your most insane version of reality, and they're perfectly capable of not only believing that, but also, making you believe it as well. So, strong Neptune, strong conflicted Neptune will often show up in charts of people who have have an interesting relationship with reality or facts as we know them. And interestingly enough, Donald Trump also has a strong and conflicted Neptune in his chart. So he also lives in his own little, private fantasy land and can convince you of all sorts of stuff that were never true because it's just easier than taking responsibility for anything, especially oneself. Now, in Russell Brand's chart and what we do know of him, so we know that there is a propensity to avoid responsibility because he'll rationalize everything and do it well. This right here is the great rationalizer. Oh my God, they could literally drown puppies and find a way to rationalize and justify what they were doing and make it seem like a good idea to other people. Ooh, scary stuff. So with that also, remember, he's got this impetuous, poor impulse control, selfish, me first, and I, Vlad the Conqueror, everybody's got to submit to me kind of thing going on with that at the same time. This kid's got some skeletons in his closet. I'm going to bet you good money that all these major platforms that are dumping him are dumping him because they know things we don't, right? That other people have pointed out or addressed to the executives and stuff that aren't out in the open legally yet, and certainly not for legal exposure yet, but it's all there. And also to remember, because, Aries, he's never been shy about his bad behavior. So, oh yeah. The tip. This is only the tip. All right, let's see what else we got. Okay, so let's take a look at the rest of the chart real quick. So he's got Venus angular at 27 Cancer. So with Venus on an angle, what Venus on the angle will do is it will make you more attractive than you might actually be. If you have Venus on the ascendant or near the ascendant, that's much more helpful because it makes you much more physically attractive to pretty much everybody. Okay, Venus on the midheaven will make you pleasing or popular, right? More attractive to people at large, at least until he gets to know you personally. Venus on the 7th house will also make you more attractive to the opposite sex or the people that you would normally be dating. And Venus on that 4th house, again, makes you more attractive. Venus on any of the angles is going to make you more attractive. Now, he has Venus on the 7th house, which elevates his attractiveness level. And this is only important because when I look at this man, I literally do not get it. I don't see anything attractive about him or aesthetically pleasing. I literally do not get it. But I also know that I'm not sure, it might be a generational thing. 'Cause I know there's a whole generation of women, I guess, and men that find that whole strung out heroin, dirty, needs a bath and a shave, and maybe a dog collar with a flea tick combination. Like they find that attractive. I'm so sorry, it sounds awful, but Russell is not the only person that looks the way he does. That this is a whole like affect that some of them for certain generations do. I guess it's kind of like punk, the back in the day. For those of you who remember punk. So, for that generation or whatever, like it's an aesthetic, it's a look, right? I don't get it. I don't get it. And if you take away all that and actually look at the bone structure and how he's kind of put together, he looks like he's not attractive. He looks like a crazy person with bad teeth. But Venus on that angle makes him much more aesthetically pleasing to other people. Hence, he's got this um, sex appeal, right? That doesn't really make any sense when you dismantle everything and actually look at what you're working with. But that's what Venus on an angle will do for you. So if you have Venus on an angle, lucky you, you could literally look like Joe Pesci and people are still going to think you're sexy. Okay, so Venus is at 27. Venus is at 27 Cancer, and it is squaring Uranus at 28 Libra. So this is going to tell us a couple of things. Remember, we're taking this in the context of the rest of the chart. So the first thing, it's going to show that he's going to have some really, he's going to have an appetite for quick, fast relationships. So his relationships are as fast and quick as his attention span. Also, he needs a lot of space room. This is not somebody who would ever do well in a strictly monogamous relationship. So anybody hoping to be in a monogamous relationship where he would actually be faithful is just pissing in the wind, darling, just pissing in the wind. Because that is not how he is wired, and that's not something he's comfortable with or would ever be happy with. Now, we could say that this Venus-Uranus square could be compounded by the fact that he had sexual trauma when he was younger that was never resolved. It could be because he had a father that abandoned him, then came in and out of his life afterwards, who was really freaking toxic, and a mother who was really deathly ill when he was very young. So he's moving back and forth between relatives, while she's, practically on her deathbed. So we could say that all of these things contribute to that Venus-Uranus instability in relationships, and also that desire to keep a distance, not get too close, not become too dependent on other people. But at the end of the day, this is still who he is. Now, Uranus does sit in his 8th house. Venus sits on that 7th. Venus rules the 3rd and the intercepted 8th. So what this would tell me, yeah, and Uranus is intercepted first. So what this tells me, and I could be wrong, we're speculating here, is that for him, sex and relationships is mental, right? And, I suppose we could say that for all the Geminis. But for him, it's very, very specific, right? So it's all a mental game or endeavor for him, right? There's no depth here. There's no emotional depth. It's like wading in shallow, rapid waters. And also, too, there's some really, because the 8th house is involved. We've got the 8th house involved. We've got an intercepted 8th house ruler and an intercepted 1st house ruler. There's some, I'm telling you, there's a big box of scary black spiders in here. So I don't want to get too much into speculating too much about that because that just gets weird. And also, too, for whatever you guys do not use this as a barometer to look at other people's charts because everything is in the context of the whole chart. In his particular case, with this particular configuration and these intercepted houses involved, one of the things that I would one of the things that I would be concerned about with him is edge play. In BDSM, they call it edge play, or like edge play, just very edgy, risky, life and potentially death kind of play. breath play where they choke each other. Like, I don't know what the hell that's about. What is wrong with you young ladies letting men choke you? Good God, do you hate yourselves that much? Um, I don't get it. I must be old. So breath play is an example, asphyxiation play, something to do with suffocation and air. He's got a thing for that. And also, too, there is the possibility that he's got a real thing for heights, having people in very, very high places, like standing on ledges at the tops of buildings, and or electrical stuff, like high voltage, dangerous electrical stuff. I'm literally speculating. We don't know because we aren't in his bedroom, and anybody who's ever been in his bedroom has either survived this and been so traumatized they don't want to talk about it anymore, or they were into it too, at which point they're never going to admit this because that's not something you share with the world at large. But yeah, there's some scary stuff in there. Okay, so what else do we have here? La la la. Oh, right. So here's what's interesting. Something positive. So, the thing to understand too is that he's not an awful person. He's a very broken man. As far as I'm concerned, he's a very broken man. Um, but there are lots of people who have been broken in very, very, very significant ways that did not choose to go down this kind of road where they have these kinds of allegations, stacking up against them like corpses, in a mass graveyard. Um, he's ended up in this position because of choices he's made. And unfortunately, looking at this chart, while it would be challenging for him to be anyone else, given his natural propensities, probably reinforced by the traumas in early childhood, at the same time, he's had every opportunity to do something differently and to fix himself, or at least attempt to make things right in his head, and appears to not have chosen that based on his behavior publicly and now allegedly privately. So I just leave that there. All right, so here's some interesting stuff. So this stellium here, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Aries, right? And that Sun in Gemini, Pluto in Libra, Neptune in Sagittarius. So what we have is what they call a mystic rectangle. So we don't really have a lot of information about mystic rectangles and how they play out. Well, we do know, the little bit that we do know is they are assumed to be very protective. And like all other positive fixed stars, benefics, or beneficial aspects, it gives a boost or an elevation in status in life. It literally smooths things out and makes things easier for people. So this mystic rectangle for Russell Brand, if we looked at it like that, would give him a boost or protection, some type of elevation in life that would involve, let me see here, Sun, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, and that's literally nearly half his chart. So we know with the Moon, Mars, Jupiter, comedy, being a funny guy, right? His humor and sense of humor and his version of comedy would have been very lucky for him, right? That Neptune, also the fantasy world he builds up around himself would actually have been a boon to him or helpful, right? That Sun, so I'm a little stuck here, that Sun and Pluto. So, Sun and Pluto can be challenging. And in this case, remember, we know that survival is number one with him, right? He is a survivor if he's nothing else, because selfishness is a survival skill. Too much selfishness is pathological. Two different conversations. So his sense of selfishness is a survival skill, so we know he's a survivor. Sun and Pluto together in anybody's chart is indicative also of somebody who is a survivor, somebody who has a tremendous amount of resilience, and is able to withstand a lot more than normal people would ever be able to live through and still have their sanity intact. Now, how much sanity he still has intact is a whole other conversation, but that Sun Pluto suggests, right? This Sun Pluto suggests, as part of this mystic rectangle, that he has been through some god awful things that he may never actually tell anybody about. Because remember, Saturn in Cancer does like to keep its secrets, especially if it makes them vulnerable. and he does not like being vulnerable. So there's going to be a whole lot of stories he's never going to give the details about growing up. They were particularly traumatic that required an inordinate amount of resilience to have survived. So I'm thinking that's what happened. So he most likely had a much more traumatic early childhood and youth than he's even letting on about. So it may have been 100 times worse than the little bit of descriptions we do get about what he went through. And that is unfortunate, and I feel very bad about that. I'm so tired of people treating kids awful. Anyway, so there's that. So these things have helped elevate him and boost him in status. There's a protective influence around that with him, which has allowed him to survive this long and get this far. So that's a good thing, right? Right here, again, we just covered that. The sun, moon, Mars, Jupiter, his identity, his gift for gab, his wit, all of these things have served him well. Oh, right, Mercury. This is the other thing too. So with Mercury and Uranus, like that. So Mercury is in the 5th house, Uranus is in the 8th. And the other thing too is with all of this, I'm not completely sure that Russell Brand doesn't have ADHD. Excuse me. He may have attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Um, compounded by trauma would have just made him impossible to deal with in school. And I'm not even sure if he finished school. If anybody knows, please let me know. But he would have had a real difficulty in any school because those things require some amount of self-control and restraint, and you got to follow the rules, and none of those things are his thing. That he struggles with these things. He struggles with impulse control. With Mercury trining Uranus, typically you get somebody who's very, very hyperactive, very nervous. With a 5th, the 8th, he's also very creative, unfortunately, because the 8th house is involved and that Uranus is there and, Aries, blah, blah, blah. He's probably more entertained by shock value than he's anything else. He's literally like the British version of Howard Stern, who Howard Stern I'm not particularly fond of because Howard Stern's an overgrown adolescent who doesn't respect women. But that's a whole other conversation also. So there's that. So do I think he did it? I think it's very, very possible that he did all of those things and more. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we have 2 credible accounts that are very, very damning. One, he had sexual intercourse with a woman without a condom, without her permission. That's just disgusting because nobody wants whatever the hell you picked up from the last person you slept with. Jesus, you dirty freaking animal. We call it stealthing now, and maybe it'll be a different word in the future, but it's just gross, just freaking gross. We don't know where that thing has been. You cover that up. Anyway, oh God. So there's that, and then this whole business about being a 30-year-old man engaging in a secret relationship with a 16-year-old girl, making her participate in keeping the secret, taking her virginity, and then engaging in non-consensual BDSM play with a 16-year-old girl who was a virgin before she met you. There's everything wrong with that. So those 2 things alone are not great. So I really believe there's a whole lot more that is here that we are not privy to, that may or may not come out in full detail. But certainly the executives at a lot of these platforms uh, probably do know. Their staff has probably clued them in, about what's been going around rumor mill or what they've seen or heard themselves. That they're certainly not going to bring up in court or charge him with, because, anyway. And remember, like, if you think this is a big conspiracy to shut him up, First Amendment, yada, 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 no, 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 because they love money more than anything else. And the fact of the matter is, they've been tolerating his nonsense for a long time because he was a moneymaker. You know, he doesn't get paid and nobody else benefits from this. All these platforms where he's generating income, they're making money because of him as well. And they've tolerated this for a long time. And for them to give up a moneymaker means that there's something much more damaging afoot that they don't want to be connected to. So I'm telling you, telling you, this is not as simple as it looks. And the other thing to remember, and I hate to, what is it? Turn your sacred cow into shish kebab here. He's got a Sun Neptune opposition in Gemini Sag, which is very reminiscent of Trump with his Gemini Sag opposition, his conflicted Neptune in his chart. This character can rationalize anything, and also too, Neptune. God bless my Neptune people. Neptune loves being a victim. Oh, poor me. And Aries is the big baby. They love being the victim and the object of sympathy and attention. Oh, poor me. Look what they've done to me. This particular combination does not bode well for somebody who's going to be an adult and take responsibility for their actions or even admit that they've done anything wrong. If anything, they're going to play the victim card over and over and over again. Now, could they actually be victims in real life? Yes, they absolutely could be. The problem is, in this particular instance, we may never actually know if they were or weren't. At some point in his life, he was a victim, but in this situation right now, as an adult moving forward, and saying that the deep state government is after him and they're trying to take away his First Amendment rights because he's made people uncomfortable. No, no, that's not it. There are people saying much worse things. They're, you know, slow to deplatform because we are all very sensitive to First Amendment rights. So, buddy boy, if you're in this position and everybody's racing for the exits to get away from you, it's because there's clearly a lot more here and afoot than we know about, and it's even worse. So, that's just my opinion. We'll keep our eyes open and see what happens. And just for grins and giggles, I wanted to look at Russell Brand's birth chart compared to the chart for the United Kingdom. Now, apparently there's a couple charts floating around for the UK. The most recent one somebody's trying to use the Brexit chart as the new chart for England. It's not. It's not. Brexit was a policy, not the birth of a new country. So we're going to use the UK birth chart as we know it, which is, for those who are setting up charts, January 1st, 1801 in London, England at midnight. And in that chart, you should have 7 Libra rising and 9 Cancer on the midheaven. So what I wanted to see is there some crossover connection with the UK chart and Russell Brand's personal chart that makes him so popular in England? Like he's literally like the golden child to a lot of people in the UK, which again I find amazing because I don't get it. But that's me. Everybody's got their personal tastes, right? But I also know that sometimes when there's connections between your personal chart and a national chart, like these things will absolutely become very pronounced either in the country's reception of you, or your experience of the country. So Donald Trump, I hate to mention this man again, but just as an example, he has some ties from his personal chart to the United States, and he has obviously he's got like a cult following of very specific types of people in the U.S. And he is their golden child. They refuse to see that he can do anything wrong. But the other thing is that he has actually been very pivotal in him specifically with the U.S. chart. He's been very pivotal in terms of the U.S. evolution, the United States evolution, but that's a whole other conversation. So I wanted to see, like, is there a relationship between Russell Brand and the country of Great Britain that would make him the golden child of so many people there? Well, my friends, here's what we found. So the first thing is he's got Jupiter, or the Great Britain's Jupiter it's out of sign, but it's there, conjunct his Venus. So Jupiter's protections and blessings and luck, and the Jupiter for Great Britain, right, on his Venus means that in a lot of ways they're very, very forgiving of Russell for all of his little misdeeds, right? And remember, he's got Venus square Uranus in his charts. Jupiter is involved in this, which suggests that, for all of his flaming, shameless, insane behavior, Venus-Uranus, angular, right? And all that we said about that, he's actually received well for that, if not celebrated, right? Because Jupiter is also reward systems. So I thought that was interesting. I'm like, well, that's interesting. Maybe that's why people love him so much in England. So the other thing we found is that Mercury, Great Britain's Mercury, is opposing his sun, which means and his natal Mercury. So sorry. The Mercury for UK is here opposing his sun Mercury. Um, and that also means that it emphasizes, right? So it could theoretically mean that there's some disagreement or challenges in communication, but what it does do is it heightens or elevates the communication of the person. So the Mercury is very, very active for Russell Brand in the UK. So he would have been very well known for his words and his speech. I don't know, you'll have to fill me in. And if he's a comedian, it kind of makes sense because comedians are known for their words and their speech, but he is very specifically his notoriety is elevated not because of his behavior or his relationships, right, or his money. It's very specifically elevated because of his speech, his communication. So that I thought was interesting as well. So what else do we have here? Well, if you look down here, that North Node for the United Kingdom is conjunct his Mars and Jupiter, right? So the North Node can get a little weird because it opens things. It's a door to things. So in many ways, Great Britain has been a door or portal for him to leap forward in life into new territories with people removed from origins he's originally come up in, which would be international stuff. And as a result of him being in Great Britain, he has in fact become very well known internationally. I don't know that he would have had the same experience or the same elevation and rise and fame had he been, I don't know, born and grown up in someplace else, like, I don't know, Slovenia, or South Africa, because that North Node opens doors, right? So it's a minor thing, but it's still there. And remember, all things in combination with other things. Now, the sun, I thought this was interesting. The sun for the United Kingdom is squaring his Pluto. So I'm not sure what to make of that. The sun square Pluto across the charts like that, in in the charts of human beings, what that usually indicates are power plays or power struggles. And it can also indicate exposure, secrets being exposed. So that sun, the Great Britain's sun, squaring Russell Brand's Pluto, to me suggests that if Scotland Yard or the Met Police, whoever's doing this, does their investigation as thoroughly as I expect that they will, there's going to be a whole lot of stuff coming out that's going to be even worse than what we know about now. Because that Pluto and that eighth, man, that's all deep, dark, dirty, dirty secrets. And remember, his Pluto is involved with that Moon, Mars, Jupiter with that North Node. And the North Node also has a lot to do with insatiable appetites. It's the things that we do compulsively that we just can't get enough of, right? Now, also, I just want to point out, now he talks a lot about being a sex addict. And listen, just for the record, being a sex addict is not the same thing as being a rapist. I'm not sure I buy into the whole sex addict thing in the first place, but even if I did or I were able to, this is not the same thing as being a predatory personality. You cannot tell me that child molesters pursue and molest and rape children because of their sex addiction, right? So don't blame your addiction for your bad behavior. This is your character making these choices. So he bandies about this sex addiction a lot like a shield. It's not going to help. But, again, Sun, Neptune opposition, Moon, Mars, Jupiter, and Aries, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, oh, poor me. So I'm just saying, I'm not real thrilled with that line. But, at this point, he doesn't really have a whole lot to work with to defend himself. So I guess, any port in a storm. Now, the last thing I found here, and I thought this was fascinating, right? The moon for Great Britain is conjunct Russell Brand's Saturn. So this would suggest to me that not only does he have a lot of deep emotional ties to England, these are a lot of deep, unhappy emotional ties. And if you believe in past lives, he's got some heavy, heavy multiple life karma that he is working out with his country and or his previous history, his previous lifetimes in this country. So there's some deep, dark, painful stuff that connects him and previous lifetimes to Great Britain that he's working out, which now that I think about it, actually feeds into this late degrees on the angles, this last chance lifetime. So I don't know what his past lives were or what that's about, but there's some heavy, heavy stuff there. Now, for those of you who don't believe in past lives, with that Moon Saturn together like that, what that also means is that his Saturn is on the moon of Great Britain and also the women of Great Britain, right? So Saturn is not a warm, touchy-feely, loving, supportive planet. Saturn is icy, it's cold, it's a taskmaster, a prison guard. And with Saturn on the moon, I would suspect, I could be wrong, but I would suspect that Russell has a real negative bias against women from his own country. Go figure. Again, I don't know. That's just what it looks like to me. So I thought that was interesting. And also, too, there would be a bit of snobbishness here. Issues of class and classism would be a big, sensitive point for him, specific to the United Kingdom. So I don't know what that's about or how you guys have your like social uh, tiers and hierarchies, and I don't know how the culture is set up, but class and classism, right, belonging to the right class, being snobs, being elitist, all that sort of stuff, or not being those things, not being part of the in group, the affluence group, really hits a nerve for him, and makes the whole experience of being in Britain really, really painful for him. So not just in childhood, but this will be a lifelong thing. So yeah, that was interesting too. So I don't know, maybe you know better. If you do, fill me in. Okay, and let's finish up. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Maya Angelou. And before we completely finish, for those of you who live in Great Britain, who are absolutely convinced that this man can do no wrong, he didn't do it, those women are clearly lying, they're trying to shut him up, take away his First Amendments, blah, 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 because he could never do such a thing. I want to remind you of one thing. You can be successful, you can be talented, you can be charming, you can be all of those things. You can be attractive, you can be all of those things and still be a predatory scumbag. Jimmy Savile is yours, and this went on for decades, and everyone turned a blind eye for decades to what Jimmy Savile was doing because Jimmy Savile was bringing in the money. So if major players are willing to turn a blind eye because of the amount of money you're bringing in for them, do you realize how badly or how bad you have to be that even the money's not enough for them to not run screaming for the exits to get away from you? So, again, being attractive, being successful, being talented, being charming has absolutely nothing to do with being a scumbag or a predator. You can still be both.